Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Sometimes fate throws us the strangest paradoxes, like the fact that a Death Eater, disguised as an aura, became one of the best defense against the dark arts professors Hogwarts ever had. Yes, we're talking about Barty Crouch Jr. impersonating the legendary Alastor Mad-Eye Moody. Many fans agree. Even though we spend nearly the entire fourth book with a fake, the portrayal was so convincing, it was almost indistinguishable from the real Moody. And that, you'll agree, raises a whole avalanche of questions. In this piece, I propose we dive into the most contradictory and puzzling aspects of Mad-Eye's biography, a character who, it seems, hides far more secrets than we usually admit. Enjoy the video. Number 1. How did no one notice for an entire year? One of the most glaring inconsistencies. Moody was locked in a trunk for a full year. Not a month, not 2, a whole year. And no one noticed, not his ministry colleagues, not the old guard of the Order of the Phoenix, not even Tonks who trained under him. So, not a single person thought to write to him, to visit him, to check in over the Christmas holidays, and yet in Order of the Phoenix, suddenly they're all old friends. That logical gap practically screams. Number 2. How did he allow himself to be captured? The second oddity is just as baffling. Mad-Eye, a veteran elite aura, the man who personally filled half of Azkaban with Death Eaters, was captured alone by Barty Crouch Jr., Barty, who was weakened after Azkaban and under his father's imperious curse. How could a man of Moody's caliber be ambushed so easily? Were there no traps, no defenses, no allies nearby to help? Was his legendary vigilance just a myth? Number 3. Why could his magical eye see through Harry's cloak? We all know Moody's magical eye was a remarkable artifact. It could see through walls, through bodies, through invisibility, but it could also see Harry while he was under the invisibility cloak. And later we learn Harry's cloak isn't just any cloak, it's one of the Deathly Hallows, a unique artifact that hides the wearer from death itself, and yet somehow a magic eye can penetrate it. Fan theories suggest Rowling hadn't yet invented the Hallows when she wrote Goblet of Fire, but that only highlights the inconsistency. Canon should be airtight. Number 4. Why didn't Harry feel any resentment after being kidnapped? Teenage psychology is a complex thing, especially when you've been deceived, nearly killed, and manipulated through the image of someone you trusted. Yet Harry acts like a saint. Not once does he show anger, fear, or even discomfort toward the real Moody. In fact, they get along great in the next book. How did he so easily separate the imposter from the real man? It's admirable, but also puzzling. Harry must have nerves of steel. Number 5. Why was he chosen to lead the Order? When Dumbledore couldn't directly lead the Order, the responsibility often fell to Moody. He was the one who orchestrated Harry's evacuation from Privet Drive. But why him? After being kidnapped for a year, wouldn't trust in him be shaken? He's not exactly known for his people skills either. Was he chosen just because no one else stepped up? Isn't that a shaky foundation for leadership? Number 6. How did he not uncover Snape's true nature? Snape is one of the most complex double-layered characters in the series, but if anyone could have seen through him, it would be Mad-Eye. He had the eye to see the unseen, the instincts of a predator, and a profound distrust of anyone who'd ever stood on the other side. How did he not find Snape suspicious? Even if he respected Dumbledore's opinion, it would have made sense to stay on alert. And yet Moody doesn't seem to notice anything at all. Number 7. Why did Tonks become his protege? Tonks is one of the most charming characters in the saga, but her bond with Moody feels strange. She's young, cheerful, clumsy, full of humor. He's grim, paranoid, a closed-off war veteran. And yet he was the one who took her under his wing, trained her, and, it seems, respected her deeply. This contradiction could be touching if given proper development, but in the books it's barely explored. Why her? Why him? Number 8. Why didn't his paranoia save him from death? Moody built his life on paranoia. He trusted no one, he set traps in his own home, and refused to drink anything he hadn't poured himself. Constant vigilance was more than a catchphrase. It was his armor. But when the Order planned Harry's escape in Deathly Hallows, that armor cracked. He helped organize the decoy strategy, paired himself with Mundungus Fletcher, and flew into the sky knowing full well Voldemort could be waiting. It should have been a perfect setup for his instincts, and yet he was the first to die, hit with a killing curse, gone in seconds, no backup plan, no final trick, just silence. Why did his vigilance fail? He knew the risk. The plan relied on loyalty, something Moody never truly believed in. Pairing with Mundungus, a known coward, should have raised alarms, but he agreed. Maybe he was tired. Maybe war dulled even his sharpest edge. Or maybe he thought the real threat would come later, not immediately. But that's the tragedy. For all his caution, all his preparation, the man who feared betrayal more than death was betrayed by the one thing he couldn't control, timing, and in that moment his motto betrayed him. Constant vigilance wasn't enough. Number 9. Why did he believe Dumbledore about the fake Moody so easily? When Dumbledore opened the trunk and freed Moody, the man was gaunt, shaken, and silent. He barely spoke, and yet within minutes he accepted the full story, that Barty Crouch Jr. had impersonated him for nearly a year. No screaming, no accusations, no interrogation. For a man who once hexed a teacup because it sat funny on the table, his reaction felt off. Moody, the most distrustful wizard alive, simply nodded and accepted that no one, not even Dumbledore, noticed the imposter wearing his face, stealing his voice, using his wand. It breaks character. The same Moody who growled, "Constant vigilance," would have demanded proof, would have grilled Severus Snape, would have wanted to know why his magical traps didn't alert anyone. But he didn't. In Goblet of Fire, he's barely given a voice after being rescued. Not one line of outrage. It's as if Rowling needed him silent to move the plot forward, and yet it leaves a crack in the myth, because the real Moody wouldn't have let a man wear his name without punishment, and he sure as hell wouldn't have let it go without asking why no one noticed the difference. Number 10. Why didn't Moody play an active role in the Battle of the Department of Mysteries? When the Order of the Phoenix bursts into the Department of Mysteries, Moody is among the first through the door. The battle is chaos, spells fly, glass shatters, time fractures, but Moody, the man known for outthinking entire squads of Death Eaters, fades quickly into the background. We see Kingsley dueling Bellatrix, Tonks falling, Sirius dying, but Moody's presence is almost a footnote. There's no grand clash and no legendary moment. The greatest aura in wizarding history is just there, barely mentioned, barely felt. It doesn't make sense. This was his moment, a fight against Death Eaters on Ministry ground with allies at his side, the war he'd prepared for his entire life. Yet Rowling writes, a whirling mass of spells and bodies, and Moody vanishes inside it. Was it his age? Old injuries catching up? Or was it something deeper? I'd a silent acknowledgement that even legends have limits. It's one of the most jarring omissions in the series. The man who demanded constant vigilance simply disappears in the moment when vigilance was most needed. Number 11. Why was his magical eye so unique? And why were there no others like it? Moody's magical eye was more than just a replacement. It was a weapon. It could see through walls, beneath floorboards, even through invisibility cloaks, not just any cloak, the cloak, one of the Deathly Hallows. Moody's eye followed him all the way back to the dormitory, Harry noted in Goblet of Fire. That shouldn't be possible. The Hallows were supposed to be absolute, yet his eye pierced that ancient magic like it was fog. No explanation, no history, just a glowing blue sphere lodged in a scarred socket, moving independently under a patch of leather. Why was there only one? In a world where magic could regrow bones, manipulate time and split souls, why didn't the Ministry mass-produce eyes like Moody's for auras? Or for surveillance? Why didn't the Death Eaters seek one out or steal his after his death? It ended up with Dolores Umbridge, embedded in her office door like a twisted trophy. But no one ever tried to unlock its secrets. Not Dumbledore, not Snape, not even Hermione, who once read an entire book on ancient runes just to decode a symbol. Moody's eye remained a mystery no one dared touch. Maybe that's because it wasn't just enchanted. It was personalized. A result of something Moody himself built or commissioned. Maybe he lost that eye in a way so brutal, so specific, that the magic used to create the replacement was one of a kind. We never learn the spell. We never meet its maker. And yet it works. Silently, constantly, watching, a perfect symbol of the man who wore it, alone, irreplaceable, and impossible to understand. Number 12. Why did Moody cling to the lone wolf style for so long? Mad Eye. Moody lived like a soldier who never came home. Even among friends, he kept his distance. He didn't laugh with Arthur Weasley. He didn't confide in Kingsley Shacklebolt. And though Nymphadora Tonks admired him deeply, called him her mentor, he never let her in. Moody trained me, she once said proudly, but he never called her by her first name. Always Tonks, always formal, always one step away from warmth. The war trained him to expect betrayal, and he never unlearned it. Living alone made sense when he was hunting Death Eaters, but even after Voldemort fell the first time, Moody never changed. He didn't build a family. He didn't trust people to watch his back. It wasn't strategy. It was survival. The more people you care about, the more weaknesses you carry. That was his truth. But that same isolation also blinded him. When Barty Crouch Jr. locked him in a trunk, Moody had no one checking in, no one who would immediately notice his absence. Even Tonks didn't sense the difference. The lone wolf had no pack to miss him. He taught constant vigilance like gospel, but maybe it was fear disguised as discipline. Maybe Moody believed no one was ever truly safe, not even from their own side. In Order of the Phoenix, when the real Moody reappears, he's quieter, tired, less sharp. The trauma of betrayal didn't just come from Crouch Jr., it came from knowing no one came looking. His life of solitude wasn't just a habit, it was a prison, one he built himself, and one he never escaped. Number 13. Why was his reputation so terrifying among wizards? Even among his allies, people feared Alastor Moody, not because he was cruel, but because he had seen too much. He walked into rooms with his wand already drawn. He checked every mirror twice. He didn't smile. "He's a little, intense," Arthur Weasley once said to Harry, trying to soften the truth. But there was something else beneath the surface, a sharp edge. Moody didn't just fight dark wizards, he hunted them. He tracked them through blood, through hex-ridden forests, through abandoned houses still echoing with screams. Kingsley Shacklebolt respected him. So did Dumbledore, but neither ever truly relaxed around him. Moody's idea of a training session was hurling real curses at you and expecting you to dodge. Tonks, his own protégé, said he once made her stand in a downpour for hours just to see if she could cast a shield charm while shivering. It wasn't cruelty, it was preparation. "Better to bleed now," he told her, "than die later." But that philosophy left scars, not just on skin, on minds. Moody was authorized to use unforgivable curses during the First Wizarding War, yet he never did, at least that's what the records say. But the fear he inspired makes some wonder. Did he bend the rules in ways the Ministry covered up? Did he interrogate suspects with magic just barely on the right side of legal? No one ever accused him directly, but they whispered, always whispered. Even Sirius Black once joked, "Mad Eye makes Azkaban look like a bloody tea party." By the time Harry met him, or rather, met Barty Crouch Jr., pretending to be him, the name Mad Eye Moody already carried weight. Even Draco Malfoy flinched when he looked his way. That wasn't just because of the magical eye, that was because the legend had teeth. Moody represented the price of war. He was the man who had given up comfort, safety, trust, maybe even his humanity, to fight evil on its own ground. And in the end, even his friends weren't sure what was left behind the scars. Number 14, why didn't he expose Barty Crouch Jr. right away? Barty Crouch Jr. impersonated Mad Eye Moody for nearly a year and no one noticed. Not Dumbledore, not McGonagall, not even Snape, who distrusted everyone. But perhaps the most shocking part is this. No one heard the real Moody trapped in a magical trunk under their feet. He was alive, locked away in a chest charmed with an extension charm and a powerful stasis spell. The real Moody, legendary aura, sat in the shadows, defeated not by an army, but by one escaped Death Eater with Polyjuice potion. It's hard to believe that Moody, the master of vigilance, didn't have a single failsafe. He was famous for magical traps, alarms, secret charms woven into his own clothes. In Goblet of Fire, Dumbledore even says, "Alastair Moody, the aura. We never use his dustbins anymore, not since he filled one with worms." This man booby-trapped everything, and yet he didn't enchant his own home with a signal. He didn't set off a warning the moment someone opened his front door, not even a protego around his own body. The Moody we were told about would never let himself be overpowered without making the enemy pay dearly. And then there's the Polyjuice. The potion is imperfect. The longer it's used, the greater the risk of exposure. One wrong phrase, one misstep. Barty nearly slips several times. When Harry enters Moody's office, he notices the trunk with multiple locks. That alone should have raised suspicion. In the book, Rowling writes, there was a large trunk standing in the corner. Harry noticed it had 7 keyholes. Why would a professor need a trunk with 7 locks, each opening a different compartment? Why would no one ever ask what was inside? But maybe the real question is this. Did no one truly notice, or did they simply not want to? The fake Moody was competent, charismatic, and, ironically, one of the best defense teachers Hogwarts ever had. Perhaps the faculty turned a blind eye to the strangeness. Perhaps Dumbledore suspected something but chose to wait. Or perhaps even the greatest minds can be fooled when the disguise is wrapped in just enough truth. Number 15. How did he become a living legend among auras? Alastair Moody's name carried weight long before the events of the Second Wizarding War. He was the kind of man other auras measured themselves against, though none could truly stand in his shadow. In the hushed corners of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, they whispered tales of his missions the way soldiers whisper legends of battles no one dares to speak of aloud. His magical eye and wooden leg were not trophies. They were reminders of the wars he had fought, but beyond the scars and paranoia lay a tactical genius and a spirit carved from the grindstone of violence. His reputation as a living legend was no accident. It was earned, hard and bloody. During the first rise of Voldemort, the wizarding world crumbled under fear. Death Eaters moved in coordinated packs, ambushing families, silencing dissenters, torturing for sport. Many auras died in vain, caught in traps or outnumbered. But Moody, Mad Eye as they began to call him with reverence, walked into the heart of darkness with nothing but a wand, grit, and a mind sharper than the edge of any curse. His first recorded solo takedown of a Death Eater cell took place near Tintagel, where he lured a team of 6 known killers into a decaying manor. When the reinforcements arrived, they found the house sealed with runes and the Death Eaters bound, unconscious, and surrounded by fragments of enchanted mirrors. The mirror trap story became part of his legend. While no official account exists, seasoned auras like Elspeth Crouch and Darius Proudfoot later confirmed that Moody had been experimenting with reflective enchantments years before they entered standard practice. It was said that he would use mirrored portals, not just for teleportation, but for psychological warfare, tricking Death Eaters into fighting their own reflections or stepping into false doors that led to magical stasis chambers. These were not standard Ministry procedures. They were inventions of a man who understood the minds of killers and bent magic into weapons of terror. There were rumours, mostly shared in pubs after hours, that Moody once spent 3 days inside a forest in East Anglia, tracking Antonin Dolohov's raiding band. When the group emerged, only 2 remained conscious, one raving about a forest that fought back. Later interviews suggested Moody had created dozens of magical decoys, enchanted scarecrows that whispered curses, animated trees that moved through illusion, even rivers that reversed current at his command. Dolohov himself lost an eye during that encounter, and while he never named Moody publicly, he reportedly refused to speak of the incident to fellow Death Eaters. Fear had found him, and it bore a single eye that saw through walls. Moody's tactics were not admired by all. Amelia Bones once noted in a private report that Alastair Moody's operations often achieve their objectives but leave behind a trail of shattered nerves, but that was part of the price. The job of an aura was not to be comfortable, nor was it to play fair. Moody embodied that truth. He trained younger recruits not with textbooks but by ambushing them during lunch, hexing them in their sleep, and rewarding only paranoia. Constant vigilance was more than a motto, it was his soul's battle cry. Some of the younger auras found him terrifying. Nymphadora Tonks, despite her cheeky nature, admitted to Kingsley Shacklebolt that she once turned invisible for an entire shift just to avoid Moody's training drills. And yet those same auras would later risk their lives following his commands, because when Mad Eye led a mission, survival rates rose by half. He didn't just fight, he calculated, misled, baited, and then struck with precision. It was said that if you survived one of his missions, you never questioned his methods again. His paranoia, often mocked, was deeply rooted in lived experience. He once unmasked a Death Eater who had disguised himself as a Ministry scribe for months. How? Moody noticed that the man blinked too frequently when copying reports. He was a former field agent pretending to be a clerk. That single observation led to a sting operation that uncovered 3 more infiltrators. "If there's one thing I trust," Moody reportedly told a colleague, "it's patterns, and when something breaks the pattern, I break it first." During the trials following Voldemort's first defeat, Moody testified in over 40 cases, his notes so extensive that even Bartemius Crouch Sr. had to commend his precision. He kept a personal ledger magically sealed, tracking every mission, every Death Eater, every unsanctioned duel. Some called it obsessive, others said it was the only reason half of Azkaban's cells stayed full. His memory was legendary, and more than once he interrupted a hearing by pointing out inconsistencies in a suspect's prior testimony, details the Wizengamot had overlooked. One tale that cemented his myth came from the siege at Bowmore. Death Eaters had taken over a manor and were using it as a base for torture and recruitment. The Ministry deemed it too dangerous for a direct assault, but Moody went in alone. For hours there was silence, then explosions. By the time backup arrived, the building was ablaze and Moody was dragging a wounded child across the lawn. Inside they found 7 Death Eaters, 5 unconscious, 2 dead, and a series of glyphs burned into the walls, hexes linked together in a way that no one had seen before or since. Moody never spoke of what happened, but the child lived. Despite the violence, Moody was not driven by hatred. His enemies accused him of cruelty, but those who knew him saw a man trying to hold back the tide with his bare hands. He rarely smiled, never drank in public, and kept a safe house filled with cursed objects he had confiscated over the years. He lived like a man who expected death at every door, and perhaps that's why it never found him easily. It took polyjuice, betrayal, and surprise to bring him down in the end. Number 16. Why did he refuse the Order of Merlin? Alastair Moody never sought praise. In the bloodiest days of the First Wizarding War, when the name of Voldemort turned men's hearts to ash and families vanished in the night, it was Moody who marched into the shadows. He tracked Death Eaters through rain-slick alleyways, across frostbitten moors, through ruins that still echoed with the last screams of innocence. He bore the scars of his service like a second uniform, half a face lost to dark magic, a leg shattered beyond magical repair, a soul singed by horrors unspeakable. And yet when the smoke cleared and the ministry offered him its highest honor, the Order of Merlin, he turned away, quietly, firmly, without explanation. It shocked the wizarding world. The Order of Merlin, First Class, had become the shining symbol of post-war valor. Kingsley Shacklebolt, who served as an auror during the war, once remarked, "No one earned that medal more than Alastair." Moody's refusal was not just puzzling, it was subversive. This was a time when the ministry needed heroes. When public morale teetered like a teacup on a broomstick, and recognition was doled out as medicine for a traumatized society, Moody's rejection felt like a slap in the face of unity. To understand his decision, one must look not at the moment of the offer, but at the long and brutal path that led there. Moody was not a man of ceremony. He lived by a code that was iron-bound and painfully simple. Justice first, politics last. During the war, when others hesitated, Moody acted. He brought in Evan Rosier, who blew off part of Moody's nose before being killed. He hunted down Wilkes, Dolohov, and Mulciber, not with glamour, but with grim determination. He never sought applause for bringing them in, only silence and sleep, both of which evaded him more often than not. A line in The Goblet of Fire describes Moody succinctly. He's been getting more paranoid in his old age, or maybe he always was. But paranoia was never a flaw for Moody, it was armor. After years of betrayal, double agents and false faces, he trusted nothing but evidence and instinct. He had seen the ministry twist narratives for political gain. He had watched promotions handed out not to those who bled, but to those who posed for photographs. He did not believe in medals, he believed in duty. There is another theory, whispered in the back halls of the Aura office long after the war, that Moody's refusal came down to who else was receiving the award. The Order of Merlin was not given exclusively to warriors. Barty Crouch Sr., for example, received one for his administrative work during the war, despite his controversial use of dementors and unforgivable curses. Moody had clashed with Crouch repeatedly. Ends justify the means was never a mantra Moody subscribed to. He believed in justice, not expediency. Standing beside Crouch to receive the same accolade would have made a mockery of his sacrifices. The memory of one moment in particular haunted him. The day he brought in Igor Karkaroff. Moody had spent months tracking the man across Europe, through cold and treachery, only to watch him turn informant in a comfortable courtroom. Karkaroff was never punished. He was allowed to flee. And when Moody saw the ministry nod its approval, something inside him hardened forever. "Too many got away," he later said to an Aura recruit, his magical eye twitching in fury. "Too many wore robes again, while the bodies of the dead turned to dust." Moody's decision to turn down the order became, in time, as legendary as his victories. Children whispered about it at Hogwarts. He was too cool for awards, they'd say. But that was a lie. He wasn't uninterested. He was disgusted. There's a difference. His silence was a protest. A refusal to stand shoulder to shoulder with cowards and hypocrites, no matter how polished their medals. It is worth noting that other recipients of the order that year included Lucius Malfoy. Though later stripped of the honor, at the time, Malfoy had claimed he had been under the Imperious Curse, and the ministry, eager to close chapters and avoid unrest, accepted it. Moody knew better. He had seen the gleam in Lucius's eyes during interrogations, the cold conviction of someone who served Voldemort. willingly. That the same medal was offered to him was an insult he could not stomach. In a battered journal found in his home after his death, there was one entry that scholars still quote. "They want a symbol. I'm no symbol, I'm a scar." It is this line that perhaps best encapsulates the heart of his refusal. The ministry wanted to elevate him to sainthood. Moody knew there was nothing holy in what he had done. He had killed, he had tortured, he had broken laws and bones alike. He had done what needed to be done, but he did not pretend it was noble. There was also the question of solitude. Moody had lost nearly everyone he cared for. His partner, Amelia Bones, had been murdered. His friend, Edgar Bones, and his entire family were slaughtered. He had no wife, no children, no family to share a medal with. The ceremony would have been empty. A few claps in a marble hall, a smile from Cornelius Fudge, whose cowardice Moody despised. What would it mean in the end? A ribbon for a man whose nightmares never ceased. What many forget is that Moody's methods were frequently questioned even within the Auror ranks. He had a reputation for being brutal. Some considered him dangerous. He was not beloved. He was feared, and he liked it that way. Acceptance of the order would have required him to soften his image, to become a mascot for a ministry he distrusted. He preferred shadows and control to applause and compromise. Number 17, how did he lose his limbs and his eye? Mad-Eye, Moody's grotesque silhouette is carved into the very fabric of the wizarding world. His magical eye swirling madly beneath tangled tufts of grey hair, his gnarled wooden leg echoing through the halls, and his war-hardened face layered with a web of scars. He is the embodiment of vigilance, constant vigilance. And yet the story of how Alastor Moody came to bear these battle trophies remains veiled in mystery. J.K. Rowling drops morsels, hints of past duels, whispers of old wounds, but she never truly gives the legend his due. For a man who, as Kingsley Shacklebolt once claimed, put more Death Eaters in Azkaban than any other, it's a narrative hole too large to ignore. One does not become a walking museum of injuries without stories to match. So why were they never told? The books do not spare details when it comes to the heroics of the Order. Dumbledore's triumphs are sung across pages, Sirius Black's tale is given breadth and tragedy, and even minor characters like Frank and Alice Longbottom receive a backstory steeped in pain and glory. But when it comes to Moody, readers are left clutching at fragments. In Goblet of Fire, when Moody, the imposter Barty Crouch Jr., to be precise, is first introduced, Dumbledore says only, he has endured much, suffered greatly. Later, we hear that he's been attacked so often he's paranoid, living in a house fortified with an arsenal of security spells. But none of this answers the question, what exact battles cost him his eye, his leg, his very peace of mind? It is implied that Moody's injuries were sustained over years of service as an Auror during Voldemort's rise to power. The First Wizarding War was a brutal era, and Moody was on the front lines. He didn't work from behind a desk. He kicked down doors. He hunted Death Eaters across moors, forests, and city alleys. It is known that he faced the Carrow twins, Antonin Dolohov, and even Evan Rogier, who, according to Sirius Black in Order of the Phoenix, blew half his face off before Moody could take him down. That line, so casually spoken, holds a clue. Rosier died in the confrontation, but not before inflicting what must have been a catastrophic injury. Could that be the moment Moody lost his eye? Evan Rosier was no mere foot soldier. He was clever, cruel, and especially skilled in dark curses. When he realized the ministry was closing in, he didn't flee. He fought. The fight with Moody must have been explosive. Imagine a narrow corridor, the walls scorched black from hexes, Moody cornered but unyielding. Rosier's wand flashes. Moody's reflexes are fast, but not fast enough. The curse tears through flesh, shattering bone and vision. The magical eye, with its capacity to see through walls and even invisibility cloaks, was not a prosthetic born of convenience. It was a necessity following a trauma that nearly took Moody's life. But that explains only the eye. What about the leg? Again, the books are cruelly silent. We hear of another encounter, unnamed, undefined, where a Death Eater cost him a leg. The phrasing is vague, almost dismissive, but no ordinary duel severs a limb. Dark magic must have been involved. Perhaps it was a confrontation with Travers or even Mulciber, who specialized in imperious curses. If Mulciber forced another wizard to turn on Moody, to strike from behind with a severing charm, the injury would have cut deeper than flesh. It would have left a psychological wound as well, reinforcing Moody's famous paranoia. No wonder he suspects betrayal at every turn. He once lost a leg because someone else's will was overridden. Moody's scars tell stories no one hears. The long gash down his left cheek, perhaps a gift from Bellatrix Lestrange during a pursuit in Nocturne Alley. The burn across his shoulder may be earned while dismantling a cursed artifact left by Rookwood. These marks are not random, they are chapters of war, and each one cost him a part of himself. Why did Rowling, a master of character depth, refuse to illuminate them? Was it an editorial choice to preserve his mystique? Or was Moody always meant to be a living relic, his past as untouchable and intimidating as the man himself? There is a peculiar power in a story untold. The reader fills in the blanks, building myths larger than truth. But in Moody's case, the absence of detail does more harm than good. It reduces his life to caricature, the grizzled old soldier, paranoid and gruff. But Moody wasn't just a cautionary tale, he was a legend, a man who survived multiple wars, who faced horrors few could name and who still chose to fight. To know what he endured is to understand the cost of the victories others celebrate. Consider the toll his body bore. He walks with a wooden leg not because of age, but because of war. Every morning he straps it on like armor, knowing that his flesh failed him, but his resolve did not. The eye is not just a tool, it's a reminder, a magical eye replacing one gouged out by hatred. Yet the wizarding world treats him with a mixture of awe and pity. Young Aurors idolize him. Old friends pity his paranoia. But none dare ask, "How did it happen, Alistair?" Because they already know the answer would chill their bones. There's a curious moment in Order of the Phoenix when Harry notices Moody's eyes spinning madly in all directions, and it unnerves him. Not because it's unnatural, but because it sees too much. It's symbolic. Moody sees what others avoid: betrayal, treachery, darkness. His injuries are a physical manifestation of a life spent seeing too clearly. That clarity came at a price. A man does not lose an eye to a curse without also losing faith in safety. A man does not lose a leg and keep fighting unless he believes the fight still matters. Perhaps the silence about his past is strategic. Moody's file at the Aura office must be classified, filled with redacted reports, mission logs scrubbed clean. If the wizarding public knew just how many rules he broke, how many lines he crossed, they might call him a criminal instead of a hero. His victories weren't clean, they were brutal, bloody, and sometimes morally grey, but they were necessary. During Voldemort's first reign, Moody became a weapon. And weapons aren't given eulogies, they're retired when the war ends, and forgotten. Number 18. Was he ever married? There is something deeply unsettling about the silence surrounding Alastor Moody's personal life. For a man who fought in both wizarding wars, who was feared and respected across the magical world, and who trained generations of Aurors, the complete absence of any mention of a wife, children, or even a fleeting romantic attachment is deafening. Other Order members, even the most secretive, had some trace of humanity written into their story. Yet Moody, a legend among wizards, remains curiously hollow in this respect. No wedding ring, no photo on the mantelpiece, no wistful memories shared during a quiet night at Grimold Place, just the grinding hum of his magical eye and the ever-present paranoia of a man too long at war. Alastor Mad-Eye Moody was not born hardened. He was not always the gnarled figure we meet in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. where his very presence, peg leg, scarred face, and mechanical eye, inspires awe and discomfort. He was once a boy at Hogwarts, house undisclosed, though many believe he was a Gryffindor for his reckless bravery or a Hufflepuff for his unwavering loyalty. Somewhere in that castle, he laughed. Somewhere he might have loved. But when the dark tides rose, Moody answered the call with a fervour few others could match. And in doing so, he may have sacrificed more than limbs or peace of mind. He may have buried the very parts of him that were most human. In the Ministry's confidential files, the ones only accessible to high-level personnel, there is a single, faint note attached to Moody's early career. Engaged to H.C., 1971-1973, status unknown. The initials have been debated among historians. Some whisper Helena Caro, a cousin to the infamous Death Eater siblings Alecto and Amicus, who allegedly broke away from her family to join the Order's early resistance. Others argue it was Hester Croft, a promising young curse-breaker for Gringotts, who disappeared under suspicious circumstances during a mission to Albania in 1973, the very region where Voldemort was believed to be hiding after his first fall from grace. If it was Hester Croft, then her vanishing aligns eerily with Moody's transformation into the haunted figure we know. Before 1973, colleagues described him as intense but sociable, even humorous in private. Bartemius Crouch Sr. once remarked during a closed-door Wizengamot session, Moody had fire back then, and heart. Merlin helped the man. He believed in people. But something changed after the Croft case. Moody withdrew, began refusing partnerships on missions, and took his obsession with constant vigilance to fanatical levels. The magical eye came later, after a near-fatal ambush in Knockturn Alley, but his true transformation, many say, began with a loss not recorded in the annals of war. The loss of someone he dared to love. The speculation is not idle. During a late-night gathering at the Burrow, long after the Second Wizarding War, Bill Weasley once told his daughter Victoire that Moody had once carried a charmed locket, a small battered thing of silver, in a pouch under his cloak. "It wasn't his," Bill had said, his voice quiet. "It had initials on it. H.C. I saw it once when he was wounded in the field. He snapped it shut before I could say a word." No such locket was ever recovered after Moody's death during the Battle of the Seven Potters. If it existed, it likely died with him, or was buried where no one would think to look. The question of whether Moody could have had a family of his own is both tantalizing and terrifying. If he did, where are they? Why have they never come forward? The answer might lie in the years following Hester's disappearance. The Death Eaters were ruthless in those days, targeting not only enemies, but their families. Moody's profile made him a prime target, and if he ever had a wife, child, or even lover, keeping them secret might have been the only way to protect them. Or perhaps he failed, and their deaths hardened him beyond recognition. In Order of the Phoenix, Sirius remarks, "You don't know what the war was like, you young ones. People disappeared, friends, family." Perhaps Moody's silence was not a choice, but a shield against a pain too deep to bear. Even his closest allies seemed to tiptoe around the subject. Remus Lupin, who fought beside Moody in both wars, never once mentions any connection beyond the professional. Kingsley Shacklebolt, known for his keen insight, only ever refers to Moody in terms of tactics and leadership. "He was the best we had," Shacklebolt told the Daily Prophet after Moody's death, "but he paid the price." The wording is deliberate. The price was not just physical, it was spiritual, emotional, perhaps even familial. One story, told in hushed tones among surviving Aurors, speaks of a mission gone wrong in the early 1980s, a trap laid by Death Eaters, resulting in the death of a young recruit named Damien Selwyn. Moody reportedly held Selwyn as he died, whispering apologies and names no one recognized. "I should have stayed," he was heard to mutter. "I should have never left her side." Whether "her" referred to Hester Croft or someone else is unclear, but the guilt clung to Moody like a second cloak, invisible but suffocating. He never took another trainee after that. His home, rarely visited, was a fortress, not just in terms of spells, but emotionally. Tonks once told Harry, "Moody lives like a dragon on a hoard. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out." She meant it as a joke, but the sadness behind her words was palpable. Inside that home, some say, was a room permanently locked by magic older than Hogwarts itself. A room no spell could open unless wielded by the caster who sealed it. Moody never spoke of its contents, but during a conversation with Arthur Weasley, he once let slip, "Some doors stay closed for a reason." Arthur, ever the kind soul, never asked again. Was Moody's solitude a choice, or was it a punishment? The most respected man in magical law enforcement, yet the loneliest? He taught Harry about the unforgivable curses, but the pain in his eyes when he demonstrated the Cruciatus was too real to be academic. "You need to know what they're capable of," he had said. But perhaps he wasn't talking about Death Eaters. Perhaps he was talking about himself and what he'd done or failed to do. The tragedy of Moody's story is not just the violence he endured, but the humanity he buried. For all the horror and bloodshed, he was at his core someone who wanted to protect not only the wizarding world, but something more fragile, more intimate, a partner, a child, a future he once imagined but lost. The magical eye saw through walls, through lies, through illusions, but it could never see what he left behind. Dumbledore trusted him implicitly. That trust was not given lightly. Moody, unlike Snape or other tortured souls, never betrayed it, but in his silence, in his refusal to speak of love or companionship, he left behind a mystery as dense as any riddle the founders could conjure. Why did Alastor Moody, mentor, warrior, and protector, die alone? Why did no one at his funeral place a flower from a wife? Why did no child cry for him? In the final battle, Moody's absence was deeply felt. Harry thought of him often during the Horcrux hunt, particularly when using the invisibility cloak. "Constant vigilance," Harry would mutter, half a joke, half a tribute. Yet even as the war ended and families reunited, no one ever came forward to claim kinship with the fallen Auror. His line, if it existed, ended in whispers and closed files. There is one more clue, obscure and nearly forgotten, in the archives of St. Mungo's. A record from 1980 lists an unnamed patient treated for spell shock trauma, a condition associated with survivors of magical torture. The patient's next of kin is listed as AM, no address, no wand registration, just initials. The patient disappeared a week later, vanished without trace. Could this have been Hester, a child, a sister, or just another red herring in a sea of unanswered questions? Perhaps Moody believed that love was a liability, that to feel deeply was to endanger others, and yet in protecting the world he may have destroyed his own. Not every war leaves visible scars. Some burrow so deep that no spell can reach them. Alastor Moody carried those scars in silence, and the magical world, for all its wonders, let him. Because asking about love is dangerous. It opens doors we're not prepared to walk through. And maybe, in the end, Moody chose to be remembered as a soldier, not as a man. Maybe he wanted the world to see his eye, his staff, his paranoia, not his heart. Because a heart, once broken beyond repair, is not something even the strongest magic can mend. So he locked it away, behind wards, behind time, behind silence, and there it waits like the man himself, watching through a door that no one can open. Number 19, why did he never seek a career at the Ministry? Mad-Eye Moody was not just a name whispered in fearful admiration across the wizarding world. He was a symbol of an era, a warning wrapped in scars, prosthetics, and unrelenting vigilance. He could have worn the plum-coloured robes of political power, walked the corridors of the Ministry with the respect of those who owed their lives to his tireless work. And yet he stayed out of the office, away from the pomp and titles, his path set stubbornly toward shadowy corners and silent threats in every sense. Moody had the career, the legend, and the war-earned credibility to claim the highest offices in magical Britain. He never did, not once, not even when the seats were wide open, begging for a warrior to become a leader. He knew too much to want it. Alastor Moody had a record unlike any other. With over half the cells in Azkaban filled by his hand, he became the terrifying benchmark for aura excellence. His magical eye was not just a tool but a metaphor. He saw through illusions, lies, and people. If there was anyone capable of running the Department of Magical Law Enforcement with strength and fairness, it was him. Even Barty Crouch Sr., a man as cold and rigid as steel, leaned on Moody for the dirtiest and most dangerous missions. Rufus Scrimgeour, who later became minister himself, was often outshone by Moody in both battle and moral clarity. And yet, as Scrimgeour stepped into politics, Moody stepped further into the margins, into his fortified house and away from society. He could have had it all. He chose not to. The Ministry of Magic had offered him promotions, not once, but repeatedly. After the First Wizarding War, the department was in disarray, reeling from the trauma of betrayal, corruption, and the unspoken compromises it had made in the name of stability. Moody was the shining exception, the one man who never bent, never negotiated with darkness. His peers wanted him in leadership, hoped he could restore honor to a tainted institution. But Moody refused. He sent back one formal rejection after another, sometimes unsigned, sometimes with no explanation. Those who knew him best, like Kingsley Shacklebolt and Arthur Weasley, suspected he had his reasons, deep, personal reasons. Moody had seen what power did to men. He had watched Crouch Sr. go from fearless crusader to authoritarian enforcer, throwing due process into the fire for the sake of control. He had watched men like Ludo Bagman charm their way through departments they barely understood. He saw corruption flower in the ministry not in spite of good intentions, but because of them. A man like Moody, who had spent decades chasing monsters, could not sit at a desk and pretend the system worked. He knew it didn't. He had cleaned its messes, he had buried its dead, he had watched it fail. There is no stronger evidence of Moody's contempt for politics than his complete avoidance of the press. The Daily Prophet wrote about him with a mixture of awe and caricature, describing him as paranoid and a relic of darker times. He never corrected the record, he never gave interviews, he never courted approval. Where most war heroes leaned into fame, Moody recoiled. He wasn't in it for recognition. When people asked him about the horrors he endured, losing part of his face, half his leg, and what little trust he had in people, he didn't answer. He simply trained more auras, worked longer hours, and vanished between assignments like a phantom. Even Dumbledore, who saw potential in everyone, never encouraged Moody to seek office. That silence speaks volumes. Dumbledore knew the toll war took on the soul. He saw the price of power and the illusion of influence. Perhaps he saw that Moody was more effective as a lone wolf, a guardian on the edge, than as a bureaucrat confined by red tape and council meetings. Moody wasn't meant for speeches. He was meant for ambushes, duels, and dangerous truths. When the Order of the Phoenix reformed, Dumbledore made him first among equals, not because Moody wanted command, but because everyone trusted that he would never lead them astray. There is a key moment in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire that reveals Moody's disdain for institutions, or rather, Barty Crouch Jr.'s impersonation of him. When speaking to the students of Hogwarts, he warns, "Play straight and watch your back. You never know where the next threat is coming from." Even though it wasn't Moody speaking, the phrase felt true to him, true to his philosophy. He didn't believe in structures, he believed in vigilance, in being prepared. He knew danger wasn't always outside the gates, it often wore familiar faces and walked protected halls. He had lived through that betrayal too many times to pretend otherwise. Moody's refusal to rise within the ministry also speaks to a deeper wound: isolation. Unlike Harry, who had friends to anchor him, Moody stood mostly alone. His closest relationships were professional, sometimes tinged with mutual respect, but rarely warmth. He mentored Tonks, but even she admitted, "Mad Eye's a bit intense." He never married, he had no children, he didn't trust enough to build anything personal. In a way, choosing not to climb the ranks was a form of protection, protecting himself from the heartbreak of watching good people lose themselves in ambition, protecting others from getting too close. The security charms on his home were legendary: multiple locks, enchanted doors, curses on every inch of the property. Some wizards joked that even Voldemort himself would think twice before attempting entry, but the truth behind the fortress was loneliness, not vanity. Moody built a life so guarded that no one could enter, not just physically, but emotionally. It's hard to imagine such a man sitting in a minister's chair, listening to policy briefings, shaking hands at public events. That was never his battlefield. After his death, there was a quiet sorrow in the air, as if something irreplaceable had been lost. Harry mourned him deeply, not because Moody had been warm or open, but because he had been genuine, honest, uncompromising. He had died protecting others as he had lived. There was no memorial in the ministry atrium, no grand speeches from officials. Just a nod in the Daily Prophet, a few lines, and then silence. The ministry had never known what to do with Mad Eye Moody, in life or in death. When Kingsley Shacklebolt became minister after the war, many thought he would posthumously elevate Moody's name, perhaps create a medal in his honour, or name a training programme after him. But even Kingsley kept it simple. He knew Moody would have hated the spotlight. He honoured him the best way he knew how, by cleaning up the ministry and rooting out the rot Moody had fought against all his life. The real tribute to Moody wasn't a statue, it was integrity returned to an institution that had once mocked it. The contrast between Moody and others of his calibre is striking. Consider Scrimgeour, who rose to minister not through politics but through service, only to become a compromised figure in his final days. Scrimgeour tried to play both sides, to protect the public while dancing around the truth. Moody would never have done that. He would have thrown open every cabinet file, exposed every weak link, even if it cost him allies. That's not what the ministry wanted. They wanted control. Moody offered truth. The two are rarely compatible. In many ways, Moody's path mirrors that of Harry Potter in later life. Harry, too, refused a political future. He turned down promotions, chose the field, kept working cases long after he could have retired into comfort. But Harry had Ginny, he had Ron and Hermione, he had a family. Moody never did, and so where Harry found peace, Moody found further distance. He was what Harry might have become in a darker world, had he lost everyone, had he trusted no one, had he surrendered to vigilance without balance. They were alike, but Moody bore the version of that life that ends in solitude, not serenity. Moody's legacy lives not in policy but in people. Every Auror who trained under him carried a piece of his code: constant vigilance, never assume, always be ready. His lessons were not theoretical. They came with bruises, scars, and survival stories. He didn't teach from books. He taught from ambushes and dark alleyways. Even long after his death, his name invoked a standard. "What would Mad Eye do?" was whispered in decision rooms when lines blurred and stakes rose. He had become myth, not minister. That perhaps was the point all along. Moody didn't want a job that could be stripped away by elections or public opinion. He wanted to be untouchable, immune to compromise. He saw politics as a place where morals go to die, where men wear masks not to hide evil but to perform goodness. He couldn't stomach it. He had hunted too many who wore badges and betrayed oaths. He would rather be alone and honest than celebrated and false. There's a tragic dignity in Moody's choice. He never demanded anything from the world, not love, not recognition, not gratitude. He gave everything and asked for nothing. That kind of man doesn't belong in the Ministry of Magic. He belongs in the pages of history, in whispered warnings, in the training manuals of future warriors. He is not a politician. He is a ghost that lingers in every honest aura's conscience, urging them to stay sharp, to doubt smiles, to trust their wand. Moody could have led a department, run a nation, sat on every wizarding council. Instead, he chose the shadows because that's where the real fight was, not in courtrooms, not in debates, but in alleyways, in cursed homes, in the silence before an ambush. He gave his life to the hidden war, and in doing so he became something rarer than a minister, incorruptible. Number 20, why did he barely interact with Harry after the 4th book? Alas to Moody, once the most feared aura of the wizarding world, who had spent his career fighting dark forces and losing pieces of himself in the process, should have been a key figure in Harry's life after the events of the Triwizard Tournament. And yet, after the trauma Harry endured in the graveyard of Little Hangleton, the man whose identity had been stolen to deceive and manipulate him largely vanished from his life. The absence is glaring, unsettling even, given Moody's deep sense of duty and justice. One would expect that someone with such a background, someone who had risked everything to protect the wizarding world, would have stepped up to mentor the boy who had seen Voldemort return. But Moody, real Moody this time, never truly does. In Goblet of Fire, Harry's 4th year is dominated by the man he believes is Alastor Moody. This figure takes a special interest in him, guiding him through the tournament, offering advice, and even teaching him how to resist the Imperious Curse. This mentor-student bond seems authentic, meaningful, and grounded in mutual respect. But when it is revealed at the end that this Moody was, in fact, Barty Crouch Jr. using Polyjuice Potion, the betrayal shakes the foundations of trust. Even so, the real Moody is found alive, imprisoned, weakened, but very much himself. The expectation is set, surely now, knowing what Harry went through and how his name had been used, Moody would reach out, connect, and try to offer something that resembled the mentorship Harry had believed he was receiving. That doesn't happen. Moody's absence in Order of the Phoenix is particularly striking. While he is a member of the Order and present at several key moments, such as escorting Harry from Privet Drive and participating in the battle at the Department of Mysteries, he rarely speaks to Harry. There's no follow-up, no conversation acknowledging that they've never truly met, and certainly no concern for Harry's well-being after what was a year of manipulation under his stolen identity. Constant vigilance, Moody's signature phrase, is echoed by others more often than it is by him, becoming an ironic symbol of what he failed to apply to Harry's emotional needs. Why does Moody remain at a distance when Harry, perhaps more than anyone, could have benefited from guidance? One reason might lie in Moody's own trauma. The man is not just battle-worn, he is paranoid, distrustful, and emotionally guarded. He may simply not be equipped for nurturing relationships, particularly with a teenager burdened by prophecy and grief. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry begins to suffer from visions connected to Voldemort, it is Snape, not Moody, who is assigned to teach him occlumency. Moody's experience as an aura would have made him a more fitting choice, but it seems he either didn't volunteer or wasn't considered. This raises the question, was Moody avoiding Harry because he feared the emotional complexity, or was there another reason he remained so aloof? Consider how Moody reacts to other members of the Order. He is always professional, often gruff, and rarely expresses anything that could be interpreted as affection. Even with Tonks, who seems to be one of the few people he genuinely trusts, there is a distance in his demeanor. Moody treats everyone like a potential threat, which is understandable for someone who has lost an eye, a leg, and possibly more to the dark arts. But if there is one person who deserved more than that rigid detachment, it was Harry. The boy had been put through a harrowing ordeal using Moody's own likeness, and that warranted more than cold glances and brief nods. In Half-Blood Prince, Moody's role shrinks even further. He's there for Dumbledore's funeral, standing like a sentinel at the edge of the gathering, but his interactions with Harry are virtually non-existent. This is despite the fact that by this point Dumbledore has taken Harry into his confidence and begun preparing him for the final confrontation with Voldemort. Moody, with his unparalleled knowledge of the dark arts, his insight into Death Eaters, and his first-hand experience of Voldemort's rise, would have been an invaluable resource. Instead, he is a background figure, silent, brooding, and increasingly irrelevant. One might argue that Moody believed Harry was already being guided by Dumbledore and didn't need additional mentorship. But this ignores the emotional reality. Harry didn't just need facts or training, he needed reassurance, someone who had seen darkness and survived it. Sirius tried to offer that, but his reckless nature made him a fragile support. Lupin was emotionally distant, haunted by his own struggles. Moody, for all his flaws, had the gravitas and the strength to become the rock Harry so badly needed. And yet he never assumed that role. The irony is that Moody, perhaps more than any other adult in Harry's life, knew what it meant to be hunted, to live with the fear of ambush and betrayal. He knew how it felt to fight a war that never ended, but perhaps because of that he had little emotional space left. His heart, if not hardened by years of loss and war, was at least barricaded. His loyalty to Dumbledore was unquestionable, his courage unmatched, but his capacity to connect seemed diminished. Maybe he feared forming attachments that could become weaknesses. Maybe he feared being used again as he had been used by Barty Crouch Jr. And there's another uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps Moody harbored guilt. After all, it was his face, his voice, his body that was used to deceive Harry. Even if it wasn't his fault, the association would be painful. Every glance Harry threw his way might remind him of his own helplessness, his failure to prevent Crouch's infiltration. Moody, the invincible aura, had been tricked, captured, and impersonated under his own roof. That kind of failure cuts deep, especially for someone whose identity is built on vigilance and control. Avoiding Harry might have been a way to avoid that shame. In Deathly Hallows, Moody dies during the mission to move Harry from Privet Drive. His death is abrupt, brutal, and largely off-page. The man who once struck terror into Death Eaters is struck down by a single curse. And Harry feels the loss, but not as one would mourn a mentor or a friend. It is the loss of a brave soldier, not a personal guardian. There's a sadness in that, a final confirmation that whatever relationship might have been forged between them was never allowed to take shape. Moody died as he lived, fighting, but he never allowed himself the luxury of human connection. It's telling that when Harry later sees a magical eye embedded in the door of Umbridge's office at the Ministry, he is deeply disturbed. He had always known that Mad-Eye Moody was dead, but to see his eye fixed in that door was more horrifying than he could have ever imagined. This reaction is not just about the desecration of a comrade, it's about the dismemberment of an icon. Moody was not a friend, he was a symbol, and symbols are hard to grieve. They don't leave holes in the heart, they leave shadows on the wall. Despite the lack of emotional closeness, Harry does carry elements of Moody's philosophy with him. Constant vigilance becomes a mantra, even if spoken with a tinge of irony. In the final battle, when Harry leads others, when he faces danger head-on, when he trusts no one too easily, these are all echoes of the lessons that the fake Moody tried to instill, but that the real Moody likely would have endorsed. In this strange way, the impersonator left a greater imprint on Harry's character than the original ever did. It's a dark commentary on how influence is often accidental, how those who truly care may fail to show it, while those with twisted motives leave deeper scars. Moody never meant to abandon Harry, perhaps, but in his silence, in his absence, he did just that. And while Harry never speaks of it directly, there's a lingering sense that something was lost, some potential bond never formed, some wisdom never passed on. Moody could have been a mentor. He could have helped Harry train, cope, prepare. He could have shared war stories that might have taught the young wizard what it truly meant to face the darkness, but instead he remained a shadow at the edge of the battlefield, a gruff voice in meetings, a name mentioned more than a presence felt. His legacy, though heroic, is one of missed opportunities. When Dumbledore's army formed, when Harry stepped into the role of teacher, he embodied what Moody never became, a guiding figure. And maybe that's the final lesson Moody gave, not through action, but through absence. In seeing what he lacked, Harry became the kind of leader others needed. He filled the void left by Moody's silence with compassion, courage, and connection. In a world scarred by war and betrayal, perhaps Moody had simply lost the ability to invest in people. Perhaps he had seen too many deaths, buried too many friends, and decided, consciously or not, to keep his distance. But Harry, younger and still filled with hope, took another path. He chose to reach out, to mentor, to lead. Where Moody had become a fortress, Harry became a beacon. The contrast is tragic. One man, broken by war, hides behind layers of armor, both literal and emotional. The other, forged in fire, emerges willing to love, to hurt, to fight not just with wands but with heart. And in that choice, Harry proves that even the bravest soldier can sometimes fail, and that true strength lies not just in survival, but in the connections we dare to make. Moody's absence is not just a plot oversight, it's a narrative wound, a silent scar on Harry's journey. His quiet withdrawal after the Triwizard Tournament is as loud as a shout, a reminder that even the most formidable heroes can falter when it comes to human connection. Harry Potter, left to navigate a world unraveling around him, deserved more than a brief escort and a distant nod. He deserved Alastor Moody, not just the legend but the man. Number 21, why did he always carry a flask and refuse to eat at school? Alastor Moody was a man forged in fire, not merely metaphorically, but through pain that left its mark on every inch of his scarred body. His presence in the Great Hall of Hogwarts during Harry's 4th year was as chilling as the eye that rotated ceaselessly in his skull, never blinking, never resting. And yet, amidst all his battle-worn eccentricities, the one that stood out most was perhaps the quietest. He never ate the food at the head table. He never drank from the goblet set before him. He always drank from his own flask, never sharing, never explaining. This oddity, so deeply embedded in his routine, raised questions that no student ever dared ask, but that lingered in the curious minds of readers long after the Triwizard Tournament had ended. Constant vigilance, he barked repeatedly, the mantra of a man who had seen too much. But vigilance did not simply mean readiness. In Moody's case, it bordered on obsession, the kind bred from personal trauma. It was easy to laugh it off as paranoia, and many did, including the teachers who had known him for decades. But paranoia does not spring from nowhere. There is always a root, and in Moody's case, it may well have begun with a single poisoned sip that nearly ended his life before it truly began. The old Aura's aversion to communal meals was not born in Hogwarts, but in the dark corners of the First Wizarding War. He had once trusted someone deeply. Her name was Elspeth Dawn, a fellow Aura who had trained beside him, fought beside him, and, some whispered, shared more than just battle strategies with him. In the autumn of 1974, they were dispatched together to investigate a hidden cabal of dark wizards in Dorset. The mission was supposed to be routine. It was anything but. They had stopped at a roadside inn known to accommodate ministry operatives, and there, during a brief lull in the storm of war, Moody took a drink of wine offered by Elspeth. It was the last time he would ever accept a beverage from another person. Within minutes, his breath had turned ragged, his vision clouded, and a burning pain tore through his veins like acid. Elspeth had gone silent. The innkeeper had vanished. When he awoke, he was in St. Mungo's, his left leg gone, the tissue of his face half destroyed, and his magical eye still months away from being crafted by the Department of Mysteries. The Aura office never found Elspeth again. Some believed she had been imperious, Others were convinced she had turned. Moody never clarified. He never spoke her name again. Mad-Eye, they began to call him afterward, not out of affection, but from awe and discomfort. He had survived, but the scars were not merely physical. From that point onward, he became what Dumbledore once quietly referred to as a man who never steps with both feet in the same world as the rest of us. Every drink came from his own flask, sealed with charms only he knew. Every meal was prepared by his own hand, or not at all. Even at Hogwarts, a place of supposed safety, he could not bring himself to trust the kitchens or the plates. The house elves' innocent smiles meant nothing to a man who had once been betrayed over wine. It is notable that when Barty Crouch Jr. impersonated Moody using Polyjuice Potion, he retained this habit. He drank obsessively from the flask, not because he feared poison, but because he needed a steady supply of the potion to maintain his disguise. The irony of this mimicry is chilling. The very flask Moody clutched to protect himself was used by his enemy to keep the illusion of safety alive. When Dumbledore revealed the truth, the real Moody had been locked in a trunk for months, deprived of his routines, perhaps tortured not just by physical confinement, but by the knowledge that someone else was exploiting his deepest fears. When Harry later recalled Moody's behavior, it was with a touch of guilt. He was a good teacher, Harry once said, in his own way. But what Harry did not see, what no student truly understood, was that Moody's teachings were etched from lived horror. He did not merely fear betrayal, he expected it. He had seen too many friends fall with a bite of bread still in their mouths, a smile still on their faces. He had attended more funerals than he could count, and at each one he tightened the lock around his trust a little more. Even Dumbledore, perhaps the only man Moody respected without reservation, could not coax him into partaking of the feast. During one Christmas celebration, while the other professors laughed and drank mulled wine, Moody sat apart, his flask close to his lips, eyes scanning the room for threats that might never come. Some say Dumbledore once gently teased him about it. "Surely our pumpkin juice has not grown teeth, Alastair?" But Moody only narrowed his eyes and replied, "It's not the teeth you see that'll kill you." It silenced the table. Moody's refusal to eat was not a matter of taste or eccentricity. It was survival. He had lived through a war that devoured the innocent and the vigilant alike. And if a man has been betrayed once, so deeply that it costs him his limb and his face, he might forgive the world, but he will never again let down his guard. There is a bitterness in that kind of life. A loneliness, too. Moody never married, never had children. Some say he had no close friends in his later years. Not because he was incapable of love, but because love was a vulnerability he could no longer afford. There are theories, of course, whispered in the darker corners of the fandom. Some believe that Elspeth's betrayal was not the end, but the beginning, that Moody was the target of multiple assassination attempts, all of them involving his food or drink. One unconfirmed ministry report from 1981 described a botched attempt on Moody's life involving enchanted stew that would solidify into concrete in his throat. The attacker, caught red-handed, was never identified publicly. Moody, naturally, never spoke of it. Mad-Eye Moody never eats with the others. The line seems throwaway when read by young fans, but for those who peer deeper, it is the window into a man who lived in a perpetual state of siege. He fortified his life not with spells, but with habits. Each charm on his flask, each refusal of a communal toast, was a shield against a world that had already taken so much from him. And unlike some who hide behind bravado, Moody's defenses were built on experience. When he taught Harry how to defend against the unforgivable curses, he did not do so as an academic exercise. He taught with the urgency of someone who had seen the Cruciatus curse leave friends permanently broken. The killing curse tear lives from bodies as casually as breath. In this context, the flask becomes more than an object. It is a symbol of what he endured and what he refused to repeat. Some fans have speculated that inside the flask were not only drinks but potions that dulled the phantom pains of missing limbs, or that steadied the tremors of old curses still clinging to his nerves. After all, the wizarding world does not heal cleanly. Magic leaves echoes, and alas, Moody had more than his share of echoes. What makes Moody's story so tragic is not merely the pain, but the isolation that followed. In a world where even werewolves like Remus Lupin found camaraderie and respect, Moody remained apart, respected but not embraced. When he died during the Battle of the Seven Potters, his body was never recovered. It vanished into the chaos, leaving behind only his eye, later found embedded in Dolores Umbridge's door. A grotesque trophy that showed how little the world had understood him. He had given everything, even his humanity, to protect others, and in return he was reduced to a relic. Yet perhaps that is why his habits matter. They are the evidence of a man who survived at great cost. The flask was not a quirk, but a gravestone in his palm, a reminder of the line he could never afford to cross again. He had once eaten and laughed like the rest. He had once trusted. That part of him died with Elspeth Dawn. When the war finally ended and Harry named his son Albus Severus, some wondered why Moody's name had not been chosen instead. Perhaps because Harry understood that some names, like some lives, are too burdened to pass on. Moody's legacy was not in bloodlines or honours, it was in warnings, in lessons bought with pain, and in a silver flask that held not just drink, but every fear, every loss, and every vow never to fall again. There is no definitive proof that a single poisoning shaped Moody's lifelong behaviour. But there is something undeniable in the way he lived, a consistency born from trauma, not madness. Even in a world where magic can mend bones and regrow flesh, some wounds remain. And sometimes the smallest habits, a sip from a flask, a skipped meal, tell the largest stories. Number 22. Is it true he survived a battle with Grindlewald? Mad-Eye Moody was never one to boast. His scarred face, missing leg and magical eye told a story louder than any words could. For decades he was the embodiment of vigilance in the magical world, but beneath the surface of the well-known tales, the First Wizarding War, his tireless hunt for Death Eaters, his paranoia that bordered on madness, there lingered a rumour, a whisper buried in the folds of time, a question that no one dared to ask aloud at the Ministry of Magic, yet one that flickered like a candle in the dark corners of history. Had Alastor Moody faced Gellert Grindelwald? There were reasons to suspect that he had. Moody was born sometime in the 1920s or 1930s, making him a young but capable wizard during the height of Grindelwald's rise in the 1940s. While Dumbledore was the public face of resistance, there were others in the shadows, fighting battles that would never be mentioned in textbooks. Mad-Eye may have been among them. He would have been just the kind of wizard needed in such times, ruthless, unbreakable, and above all, unafraid to get his hands dirty. The official records are strangely silent about Moody's role in the war against Grindelwald. Ministry documents, if they ever existed, have long since disappeared into the restricted archives of the Department of Mysteries. But fragments remain, scraps of testimony, whispers from auras long retired. One such whisper came from an old colleague of Moody's, Tiberius Ogden, who once told an apprentice over fire whiskey that Alastor was never the same after Silesia. That's where he left more than his leg. Silesia, a forgotten region during Grindelwald's campaign of terror. In 1944, it was a hotspot of magical insurgency, a known base of operations for Dieter Rasker, one of Grindelwald's most brutal lieutenants. Rasker had a reputation for conducting cruel experiments on Muggle prisoners and training dark creatures in hidden strongholds. He was wanted by every magical authority on the continent. It is said that the British Ministry of Magic secretly dispatched a team of aurors to the region, not to capture Rask, but to eliminate him entirely. Moody was among them. The operation, dubbed Midnight Ashes, was never officially acknowledged, but its ghost lives on in the memories of those who survived it. Rask's hideout, buried beneath a ruined Gothic church, was laced with dark enchantments and curses so old even the goblins feared to approach. The aurors entered under cover of darkness. Only 3 returned. Moody was one of them. But he was carried out, barely alive, his right leg severed below the knee, his left eye destroyed, his face scarred with burns that would never heal. From that moment on, Mad-Eye became a legend, not just among his comrades but also among his enemies. It was after Silesia that he adopted the magical eye, crafted in secret by an artificer in Nocturne Alley, enchanted with a blend of occlumency and thestral magic. It was after Silesia that he began to speak of constant vigilance, not as advice, but as a law of survival. And it was after Silesia that even Albus Dumbledore began to treat him with the respect reserved only for those who had stared death in the face and refused to blink. There's no direct account of Grindlewald being present at Silesia, but the timing is notable. Dumbledore defeated Grindlewald in 1945, just months after the Midnight Ashes mission. What if Rasker's compound had been Grindelwald's fallback plan? What if the assault had disrupted the chain of command within his inner circle? It wouldn't be the first time Grindlewald avoided direct confrontation by using proxies. Still, the brutality of the fight, its dark, magical residue, the Dementor-like cold that lingered over the church ruins, suggests that someone far more powerful than Rask was there. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Alastor Moody tells Harry, "You need to be alert and ready for anything. You never know when dark magic will strike." That wasn't the voice of a man who had simply trained in classrooms or conducted safe arrests. It was the voice of someone who had walked through true darkness, someone who had seen magic that left its mark not just on the body but on the soul. Some claimed that Moody's magical eye was necessary not because he lost sight in battle, but because he saw someone he was never meant to see. More curious is a letter found in the personal collection of Elphias Doge, a close friend of Dumbledore. In one torn and barely legible passage, Doge writes, "Alastor carried secrets none of us could touch. Even Albus spoke of him as one who had emerged from the fire more steel than man." We never asked what that fire was. Perhaps because we knew the answer and feared it. The letter was never published, but its contents circulated among the older members of the Order of the Phoenix, reinforcing a belief they had long held, that Moody had faced something or someone that changed the course of his life forever. Could it have been Grindelwald himself? Grindelwald was no stranger to sudden, secretive appearances across Europe. He built his following through charm, terror, and magical dominance, and he had a pattern of protecting his inner circle with his own wand when the time came. Perhaps Rasker's position was valuable enough for Grindelwald to intervene, and perhaps in that desecrated church, Alastor Moody found himself standing before not just a monstrous follower, but the dark wizard himself. The timing fits, the wounds fit, the silence fits. Why else would a man so proud, so quick to recount his battles with Death Eaters, never once speak of how he lost his leg? Why else would even the ministry, a place not known for its discretion, keep quiet about the details of his most defining injury? Some scars are too sacred. Some battles are not for glory, they are for survival, and the price of survival is silence. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells Harry, "It is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more." But perhaps Dumbledore knew exactly what Moody had faced. Perhaps he recognized that Mad-Eye had looked into the abyss long before Voldemort returned, and had chosen to walk back from it. Unlike others, Moody did not chase power or immortality. He hunted shadows not to banish them, but to contain them. There is another clue in the pensive memory of Igor Karkaroff's trial. As Moody interrogates him with unrelenting precision, his demeanor is chillingly controlled. Not angry, not sad, just clinical. It's the look of a man who has already seen the worst the world has to offer, and now treats pain as routine. "You know who we're after, Karkaroff," he says. "Start talking." But the name he never asks about is Grindlewald. He never mentions it. Almost as if it's too deep, too raw, too far back in the past to drag into the light. There's also the curious case of the magical prosthetic leg. Wizarding medicine, especially in the hands of St. Mungo's finest, can regrow bones overnight, as we see when Harry loses all the bones in his arm in the Chamber of Secrets. Why didn't Moody's leg regenerate, unless the damage wasn't just physical, unless it was the result of dark magic so corrosive, so forbidden that even magical healing couldn't touch it? Raska was known for such spells. So was Grindlewald. In Fantastic Beasts, The Crimes of Grindlewald, we witness just how powerful and manipulative the Dark Wizard was. The firestorm at the end, blue flames of sentient destruction, wasn't just a display of power, but a weapon designed to test loyalty and eradicate doubt. What if Moody saw that kind of magic years earlier? What if he survived it by sheer willpower? No wonder he became obsessed with preparedness, with traps, with seeing through walls and illusions. He had learned the hard way that even the impossible was possible. The name Mad-Eye wasn't just a nickname. It was a warning, a title. A scar turned into armor. He became the man who saw too much. And once you see Grindelwald's war, once you survive it, you never sleep the same way again. Friends betray, shadows linger, and the line between hero and monster begins to blur. Moody understood this better than anyone. Perhaps that's why he trained young Aurors so ruthlessly, not because he wanted them to be like him, but because he didn't want them to have to be. Even in death, Moody left questions unanswered. When he was struck down during the Battle of the Seven Potters, it was not by Voldemort himself, but by a stray killing curse. Random, meaningless. After surviving a lifetime of darkness, it was irony that killed him. But maybe that's fitting. True soldiers rarely die in grand finales. They disappear in the chaos they tried to contain, just like the memories of Silesia, just like the fire that burned away half his face, just like the truth he never told. Dumbledore once said of him, "Mad-Eye Moody is a man who has given his life to the cause." But perhaps the truth is stranger. Perhaps Moody didn't give his life to the cause. Perhaps it was taken from him long ago, in a battle so dark and forbidden that history itself refused to remember it. Perhaps the greatest mystery of his life is not how he died, but how he lived afterward. And if you ask those who knew him best, they will not deny the rumor. They will only lower their voices and nod, as if acknowledging a ghost in the room. No one says it directly. But in the flicker of torchlight, in the hollow echoes of forgotten cathedrals, the whisper remains. Yes, Mad-Eye Moody fought Grindlewald. And he won, but not without a cost. Number 23. Why was he so distrustful of muggles? Mad-Eye Moody's eyes had seen more than most Aurors would dare face, and what they'd seen had twisted the way he looked at the world, both literally and metaphorically. Though he fought tirelessly against Death Eaters and their ideology of blood purity, there remained in him an almost contradictory suspicion toward muggles and muggle-borns. The books never delve deeply into this, but hints and gestures, when pieced together, suggest a man driven not only by war, but by a bitter memory that even magic could not erase. Moody's paranoia was legendary. Constant vigilance, he barked at students during his year at Hogwarts. Eyes, one magical, one real, roving constantly for threats no one else could see. His teaching was brutal and intense. He didn't coddle his students, regardless of their heritage, but some noticed the edge was sharper when he spoke to those born of non-magical parents. He once said coldly, Don't trust what you can't defend yourself against. A wand is a wizard's only ally, after Hermione defended a muggle-born classmate. It passed unnoticed by most, but the tension lingered. Hermione Granger, whose intelligence Moody surely respected, seemed disturbed by his tone. The official records never mention anything about Alastair Moody having a family. He was a loner, obsessed with the shadows of the past. But among the older Aurors there were whispers. During the First Wizarding War, Moody had once taken on a covert mission in the Scottish Highlands, where a family of muggles had been targeted by Death Eaters for harbouring a fugitive squib. Moody arrived just in time to save the youngest daughter, a girl named Elspeth Rowan. She was 17, sharp-witted and fascinated by the magical world. For reasons no one ever confirmed, Moody returned to check on her more than once. Alastair's superiors warned him not to get involved. Crouch Senior himself wrote a note, buried deep in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement archives, advising Moody to remain focused on the mission, not personal sympathies. But Moody did not listen. He taught Elspeth small protective spells, nothing advanced, nothing illegal, but enough that she could draw a line of salt and recognize the signs of dark enchantments. He trusted her more than he ever admitted. She reminded him, some believed, of someone he'd lost, perhaps a sister, perhaps a memory of innocence. Then came the betrayal. In the fall of 1980, just before Voldemort's first defeat, a Death Eater cell was ambushed in an abandoned castle near Perth. Moody had tipped off the order based on information given to him by Elspeth. It was supposed to be a victory, but when the order arrived, the castle was empty. A trap had been set. One member of the team, Edgar Bones, was killed. Another, Dorcas Meadows, vanished. Moody escaped, but not without injuries. His leg was torn, and that night marked the beginning of the spiral that led to his artificial limb and magical eye. Later investigation revealed that Elspeth had disappeared the day before the ambush. A report, unsigned and classified, suggested she'd been seen entering a ministry outpost with a man later identified as Antonin Dolohov. Some believed she was coerced, others that she had been playing both sides from the start. Either way, she was never seen again. Moody never mentioned her name again, and no formal charges were made. But the bitterness in his voice grew colder, sharper. He no longer trusted information from outside the wizarding world. It was around this time that he began to refuse working with Muggle authorities despite being authorized to do so. According to Kingsley Shacklebolt, Moody once said, "They don't understand us and they never will, and that misunderstanding gets people killed." It was clear to those who knew him best that he wasn't simply being cautious, he was haunted. He had let himself believe in someone once, and that belief had ended in death and mutilation. The war had taken much from many, but Moody had lost not only flesh, but a piece of whatever remained soft inside him. His suspicion extended to Muggle-born witches and wizards as well. He never spoke against them openly, and he certainly didn't espouse blood purity nonsense, but his attitude was telling. Nymphadora Tonks, one of his closest protégés, once remarked that Moody always tested her more harshly than the others. And though she laughed when she said it, her eyes were not amused. Tonks was half-blood, born of a Muggle-born witch and a pure-blood wizard. She once told Remus Lupin that Moody trusts your wand, not your words, and he trusts it more if your parents went to Hogwarts. Some have argued that Moody's behavior was a survival mechanism. In a world torn by war, trust was dangerous, but there is more to it. When he taught the unforgivable curses in defense against the dark arts, he emphasized emotional control and inner strength, but he also said something strange. The dark arts don't always come from evil, sometimes they come from pain. That's why they're so dangerous. He looked directly at Hermione when he said it, and though it was Barty Crouch Jr. impersonating him at the time, those were Moody's actual teaching notes, meaning the words came from the real man. This bitterness followed him into the Second Wizarding War. Moody supported the Order's alliance with Muggle-borns and half-bloods, but he often kept a distance. He argued fiercely against recruiting unvetted Muggle-born volunteers into sensitive positions. He clashed with Arthur Weasley over this, calling him too trusting for a man with so many children. Molly Weasley once told Dumbledore that Moody frightened her, not because of what he's done, but because of what he refuses to feel anymore. During Harry's escort from Privet Drive in the Deathly Hallows, Moody insisted on leading the most dangerous part of the operation himself. He placed the most expendable pairs together, likely calculating risks with military precision. But it was telling that he chose to fly with Mundungus Fletcher, a known coward. Some argue this decision stemmed from strategic reasoning, but others whisper it was punishment. Fletcher had betrayed Muggle clients before, selling stolen goods and endangering lives. Moody never forgot. When he died, Moody left behind no diary, no memoirs, no confessions. But his private quarters, preserved briefly by the Order, contained one curious item, a faded photograph of a young woman in front of a rural house. No spell could identify her, but she bore a striking resemblance to the archived image of Elspeth Rowan. The photo was marked with a protective charm, one used to keep items safe from fire, water, and time. No one ever touched it. Moody's hatred was never indiscriminate. He didn't hate Muggles the way Death Eaters did. He didn't seek their destruction or believe in wizarding supremacy. His was a colder sentiment, born not of ideology but of bruised loyalty. He saw Muggles and Muggle-borns not as threats but as unknowns, unpredictable elements in a world that had already burned him too many times. He didn't question their right to magic. He questioned their understanding of the war they were joining. In many ways this made him more dangerous. The Death Eaters were obvious in their hatred. Moody's mistrust was harder to pin down. It lived in shadows, in silences, in calculated exclusions. When Hermione once asked him why the Ministry had failed to protect Muggle-borns properly, he reportedly muttered, "Because protection starts with understanding, and that's something the Ministry never learns." That remark, cryptic as it was, reveals more about him than any spell ever could. One could argue that Moody's deepest fear wasn't betrayal, but blindness. His magical eye represented more than vigilance. It was a refusal to be deceived again. He had once looked at someone and seen a friend. That misjudgment had cost lives, so now he looked at everyone as a potential threat, regardless of blood, origin, or allegiance, but especially those who came from the world he couldn't predict, the Muggle world. This did not make him a villain. It made him human. In the end, Alastair Moody stood for justice. He believed in the law, in the Order, in the idea that evil must be hunted and defeated, but he also believed that trusting the wrong person could doom everything. His story is not about hate, it's about the cost of survival, and in that cost there is a caution that sometimes the deepest scars are the ones we don't talk about, not because they are secrets, but because they are too old to heal. Number 24, where did he keep his magical artifacts? Of all the mysteries surrounding Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, perhaps the most tantalizing is not how he captured so many Death Eaters, nor how he survived countless ambushes and betrayals. It is the quieter enigma of where he kept the magical artifacts he was said to have collected over decades of service. While most wizards trusted Gringotts or their own secured homes, Moody's paranoia was so legendary that even his closest colleagues doubted he kept anything important in places that could be located on a map. He lived in the constant belief that someone, even a friend, might betray him. Constant vigilance, he muttered like a prayer, and vigilance to him meant preparing for even the most absurd possibilities. The Ministry of Magic, particularly the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, had long assumed that Moody must be storing at least some items in his office or within the official Aura archives. Yet when he retired and the office was cleared, nothing of value remained. The few items that did turn up were decoys, a sneakoscope that emitted false readings, a faux glass showing intentionally misleading reflections, a box of Peruvian instant darkness powder rendered inert. Tonks, who once shared missions with him, confessed that even she had no idea where Moody went when he said he was securing evidence. As she once joked in the Aura break room, he probably keeps it in a broomstick that only opens on Tuesdays. And yet, the rumours refused to die. There was talk among younger recruits that Moody had enchanted a private warehouse that shifted locations according to the lunar calendar. Others whispered of a charmed steamer trunk expanded far beyond legal limits, which contained not only storage compartments but entire rooms where items were protected by magical guardians, shifting staircases and memory-erasing wards. The most dramatic theory, however, was that the trunk moved itself constantly between magical coordinates, phasing in and out of pockets of space known only to him. A spellwork so complex it bordered on the kind of magic taught only at Durmstrang or in the archives of the Unspeakables. Alastair's cottage was famously protected by layers of curses and jinxes, yet even there no major magical artifact was ever found. After his death during the Battle of the Seven Potters, members of the Order returned to the property to search for clues. Kingsley Shacklebolt oversaw the process himself. They uncovered no trunk, no hiding place, only old spellbooks, broken wands, defensive talismans, and dozens of hand-drawn maps with coded symbols. It was Arthur Weasley who found something curious, a rune-etched shard embedded inside the fireplace stone, pulsing faintly with magical residue. "I think," he reportedly said, "this was never a hiding place, it was a diversion." The Daily Prophet ran an article months later boldly titled "The Lost Vault of Mad-Eye Moody." In it, an anonymous source, likely a junior archivist at the Ministry, claimed Moody had once submitted an artifact to the Department of Mysteries for temporary analysis. The item, a compass with a cracked black face and inscriptions in Old Norse, reportedly pointed toward places of dark magic, not north. The source said the compass had vanished from Ministry records days after Moody retrieved it. "That man never trusted bureaucracy," the article noted. "He treated it like a leak waiting to happen." Those who knew him best believed the collection went far beyond cursed compasses. Bill Weasley, who briefly collaborated with Moody on a Gringotts breach involving dark wizards laundering magical currency, recalled that Moody carried a pocket watch that ticked backwards and rang only when someone nearby was lying. During a critical negotiation, the watch had started ringing in shrill bursts. Moody had not said a word but stared at the goblin until he cracked. Later, Bill asked where Moody had gotten it. "Old friend," was the reply. "Long gone now." There is only one documented inventory that hinted at the scope of Moody's cache. It was written not by Moody himself, but by Dawlish, who once spied on the old Aura at the Ministry's request, suspecting him of withholding dangerous artifacts. According to Dawlish's account, preserved in a confidential case file locked in the Aura headquarters, Moody was seen carrying a satchel that, upon accidental inversion, revealed what appeared to be the corner of a gilded mirror with dragonbone edges, a broken crystal orb, and a rolled tapestry inscribed with moving glyphs. Dawlish reported seeing the satchel consume itself moments later, vanishing into thin air with a soft pop. No one believed him, not until years later. The notion that Moody had created a mobile sanctuary for his treasures took deeper root when Mundungus Fletcher, while detained for trafficking stolen magical goods, confessed to once tailing Moody to a graveyard outside Dover. According to his statement, Moody stood before an unmarked crypt, whispered a phrase in a language Mundungus couldn't understand, and disappeared, not into a structure, but seemingly into the space behind it. "Like walking through fog," Mundungus said, "but thicker, and then gone." The Ministry dismissed this as delusion, fueled by Dung's notoriously poor sobriety, but Dung swore he never saw Moody come out again, even after waiting 3 nights under disillusionment. What makes the story more compelling is the consistency across unrelated tales. A trainee named Elspeth Rawle, who worked briefly as Moody's assistant, remembered a room inside the Aura complex that no one else seemed able to enter. Moody took her there once, when she'd proven herself during a raid in Nocturne Alley. Inside, she later recounted, was nothing but empty walls and a single desk. But when he tapped the desk 3 times and whispered something, the walls shimmered. I could see outlines of shelves, rows and rows of things, but the second I tried to move, I was outside again, back in the corridor. The idea of a pocket dimension accessible only to Moody through a keyword, a magical token, or even a state of mind grew popular among conspiracy theorists. Some believed it was embedded in a ring he wore on his right hand. Others insisted it was tied to his artificial leg, which might have been hollowed and enchanted from within. Even the mad theory that his magical eye served not only as surveillance but as a literal key to an alternate chamber was circulated widely among enchanted artifact collectors and rogue curse breakers. It's worth noting that Albus Dumbledore once hinted at Moody's unorthodox archival methods during a staff discussion at Grimmauld Place. "Alastor has always kept his secrets in motion," he said. "It's how he's survived. Stagnant places attract curious minds." This comment, made in the presence of Sirius Black and Molly Weasley, was dismissed as metaphor. But when Sirius later examined a charmed globe Moody had left behind, which produced constellations not found in any magical or muggle charts, he began to suspect otherwise. Some speculate Moody used a modified version of the Carpathius Extremis charm, but altered it so heavily that the laws of magical containment were bent nearly to breaking. A suitcase like Newt Scamander's, perhaps, but layered with dozens of fail-safes and illusions. Notably, Scamander once claimed during a MACUSA hearing that there exist containers you don't open, they open you. Whether he referred to Moody's trunk or something far worse, the expression stuck in the minds of wizarding legal historians. Luna Lovegood, years after the war, wrote in The Quibbler about an artifact her father once bartered for in Albania, a magical compass that turned cold when pointed at lies. Her father claimed it had belonged to a British aura with one good eye and a collection of things no man should own. Luna's article included a sketch, a circle of wood with runes carved along the rim, and a blood-red needle. The sketch matched precisely the description in Dawlish's confidential file. The Aura Academy sometimes uses the tale of Moody's secret vault as a lesson in over-preparation and magical secrecy. One instructor, Professor Judith Tallow, tells her students that if they ever find themselves burdened with powerful objects, they must choose security over showmanship. But even she admits, no one ever found where he kept it all, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the safest vault is the one that isn't real until you need it. To this day, treasure hunters and rogue curse breakers scour places Moody was known to visit. Forests in Albania, crumbling towers in northern Scotland, even certain rooms in the Department of Mysteries are examined under the theory that they might contain echoes of his hiding place. One seeker, a former Slytherin named Callum Borgin, disappeared after claiming he had located a magical lock tied to Moody's name. All that remained was his boot, found embedded in a wall of ancient stone. What makes the myth endure isn't just the hope of finding powerful objects, but the idea that someone could be so deeply, so effectively hidden in a world of magic. It's a tale of power, paranoia, and the refusal to leave anything to chance. Moody may be gone, but the thought of his secret vault haunts the wizarding world like a phantom that refuses to settle. And perhaps it should. For if the tales are true and the key to Moody's arsenal still exists, embedded in a ring, a trunk, a phrase, or even a memory charm forgotten by its own wielder, then his influence has not ended. Somewhere, in a fold of time or magic, the last secrets of Mad-Eye Moody still wait, hidden not from the world, but from the very idea of discovery. Number 25. Is it true he took part in unofficial duels? Alastair Moody, known to generations of witches and wizards as Mad-Eye, was not always the scarred, paranoid legend seen during the Second Wizarding War. Before his time as a hardened aura and a symbol of law enforcement, he was just a name whispered behind the walls of pubs and wand shops, a young man with a taste for danger and an unnerving proficiency in magical combat. The wizarding community, especially the older generation, remembers a time before Voldemort's first rise when the lines between legality and outlaw dueling were blurred. It was an era not recorded in official history books, yet preserved in rumour and cautionary tales, and Alastair's name surfaces again and again in this murky fog of whispered recollections. The years between Grindlewald's fall and Voldemort's rise were turbulent in their own quiet way. With the Ministry of Magic still rebuilding its protocols for magical enforcement, and with a sense of power vacuum lingering in certain magical circles, disputes between witches and wizards were often settled in what came to be known as informal duels. These weren't the polished affairs taught at Hogwarts with a judge and clear rules. These were raw, chaotic confrontations where survival often depended on cunning, speed, and a brutal disregard for convention. It was during this strange twilight of order and anarchy that a young, fiercely driven Moody allegedly made his reputation. Though official records begin documenting Alastair Moody's career around his early years in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, some auras from his era, now long retired, or too cautious to speak publicly, have hinted at a less conventional origin to his unique fighting style. There's an old aura archive, largely forgotten and hidden in the sub-basement of the Ministry, containing case notes from a series of unsanctioned dueling rings in the 1960s. One recurring alias, MAM, appears over and over, attached to reports of illegal duels stopped moments before fatal outcomes, or strange disappearances later found to be resolved by mysterious acts of vigilante justice. It is said that Moody was once seen, hooded and unrecognizable, entering a back room behind a shop in Nocturne Alley, accompanied by two known practitioners of grey magic, Felix Greaves and Cordelia Maris. Both were infamous for their involvement in what was called the Ashfire Circuit, a loose network of duelists who travelled across Britain and Europe to engage in wand combat not governed by the dueling code. In one archived Ministry report dated 1967, an anonymous informant describes a masked participant who used a trick spell to make his wand appear shattered, only to unleash a stupefy from behind his back moments later. This style, disguise, feint, and overwhelming counterattack would become Moody's signature decades later. Moody's disdain for traditional defensive forms taught at Hogwarts may also be traced back to these early experiences. The school's curriculum emphasized clean spellcasting and courteous behavior, values Moody dismissed with biting sarcasm in later years. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Barty Crouch Jr., while impersonating Moody, remarks, "You need to know what the dark arts are before you can defend yourself against them." Though it was not truly Moody who said it, the statement rings with a philosophy Moody lived by. It's widely believed that the real Moody shared this conviction forged in the lawless chaos of unofficial combat. One of the most consistent rumours involves a duel in the Black Hollow Ravine near Cornwall, where a group of 5 rogue duelists held regular matches. One such event, documented in the private diary of Ignatius Podmore, a cousin of Sturgis Podmore, tells of a duelist who ended a match with a manoeuvre so unorthodox that it left the opponent's wand embedded in stone. He didn't just disarm his enemy, Podmore wrote, he humiliated him with a ghost spell, making the duelist see phantom allies all around. No one had ever seen illusions used that way before. The unnamed victor was described as having one real eye and one glass orb that flickered strangely in the dark. While Moody's magical eye had not yet been invented, it's possible he was already experimenting with visual enchantments, perhaps early versions of the surveillance charms that later defined his paranoia. Moody's name was also linked, though never officially, to the fall of a well-known dueling champion, Gareth Burke, a pure-blood wizard from the Isles of Scilly, who vanished mysteriously in 1971. Burke had been a fixture in informal dueling rings and was known for humiliating his opponents. His disappearance occurred shortly after a duel in Aberdeen ended with the victor using a modified blasting curse that caused the wand to backfire. According to the now restricted Falcon files, an unapproved internal document circulated among the Aura elite, Moody was spotted in the area the night before, reportedly speaking to a muggle about setting a trap. The records don't confirm what the trap was or who it was meant for, but the coincidence is striking. The secrecy surrounding these events only adds to the mystery. Moody never commented on his life before joining the Auras, and any attempts to uncover details are usually met with dead ends. Even Dumbledore, who knew Moody well, once described him as someone who knows more ways to disable a man than most dark wizards ever will, yet keeps his silence about where he learned them. In Order of the Phoenix, we see Moody's uncanny ability to anticipate attacks, place protective spells without uttering them, and devise countermeasures on the fly. These aren't traits developed solely from ministry training. They hint at hard-earned lessons learned on the edge of legal behavior. There is a tale that has survived in the oral histories of the Fawley family, known for their controversial magical experimentations about a masked wizard who defeated both brothers Julian and Marius Fawley in a single duel using a combination of disillusionment charm, time-delayed Expelliarmus, and a voice-mimicking enchantment. The technique was so advanced and disorienting that one of the brothers swore the attacker broke time itself. They never dueled again. Though no names were ever confirmed, several sources within the family later pointed to a young Alastair who had no patience for honor but an unmatched love for victory. Moody's preference for acting first, his hallmark philosophy, seems born not of theory but of necessity. In a world where duelists rarely gave warning and rules changed with every alleyway, hesitation could mean death. This belief was seen plainly in the way he trained the DA and spoke to younger wizards. Even in the Triwizard Tournament, Moody's, or rather Crouch Jr.'s lessons were laced with brutal practicality. "If there's one thing I taught you," he said to Harry, "it's constant vigilance." The phrase, often mocked by students, was not paranoia to Moody, it was survival. It's worth noting that Moody's relationship with other Auras was strained during his early years. His reports were frequently challenged for using excessive force, and internal memos show repeated requests for him to tone down his tactics. One such memo from Amelia Bones questions why he used a spell previously documented only in dueling rings to subdue a smuggler in Diagon Alley. The spell in question, Spectrebound, creates a temporary illusion of being surrounded by Dementors, a psychological weapon Moody allegedly learned from an unnamed duelist in Eastern Europe. Another piece of the puzzle lies in the development of Moody's famous trunk, which featured multiple compartments protected by complex enchantments. While practical for storing dark detectors and supplies, it's believed that Moody's concept came from his days evading ministry patrols during unauthorized matches. The trunk's design mirrors the mirror boxes used by duelists in the black market circuit to hide illegal spellbooks and potion ingredients. Again, no proof ties Moody directly to the ring, but the resemblance is uncanny. As Moody rose in rank and prominence, much of this past was buried, perhaps by choice, or perhaps by quiet orders from those who valued what he had become more than how he got there. It is telling that in the First Wizarding War, Moody was the Aura with the highest number of dark wizard captures. His experience and tactics were unmatched. Many of the spells he used in the field had no known origin in the Hogwarts curriculum or standard ministry training. What was deemed unconventional may have been second nature to a man forged in unsanctioned duels. The silence of official records leaves room for speculation, but the stories persist. Bartemius Crouch Sr., a man with no tolerance for legal grey areas, still vouched for Moody and gave him clearance to use unforgivable curses during the war. This unprecedented trust may stem from Crouch's private knowledge of Moody's brutal effectiveness, earned far from the courtroom or classroom. There are hints that Crouch once admitted to Dumbledore that Moody knows things you can't learn in any book. Perhaps the most compelling evidence lies in Moody's injuries. His face, eye and leg were not lost in any recorded battle. The Ministry only notes field incidents with little detail. Could it be that one such injury was the cost of a duel gone wrong in the illegal circuits? The enchanted leg and eye suggest a man accustomed to loss, a warrior built through pain and adapted magic, not formal instruction. These wounds became symbols of his resilience, but also silent testimonies of battles the public was never meant to know about. Even the way Moody held his wand was different, always drawn, never holstered. Old photographs show him gripping it tightly even during speeches or meetings. It was as if he expected attack at every turn. Those who've studied dueling psychology note that this trait is common among fighters from unregulated environments. They do not trust the pause between action and reaction. They do not believe in the mercy of hesitation. Years after his death, a sealed file was released by the Department of Mysteries, revealing Moody's personal notes. Most of the document remains redacted, but one line stands clear. Some skills I cannot name, some spells I cannot teach, but they saved my life when the Ministry wasn't watching. Whether this is a confession or a justification, it's the clearest glimpse into the hidden years of Mad-Eye Moody. And so the question remains open, lingering like smoke in a dueling pit. Did Alastor Moody fight in underground duels? The evidence does not lie in a single statement or document, but in a pattern, a web of scars, techniques, and memories too strange to be learned in any school. If true, this hidden past doesn't tarnish the man's legend, it completes it. Number 26. Who was his mentor in his youth? Alastor Moody, known to the wizarding world as Mad-Eye, was a man defined by his scars, those on his face, his mind, and his heart. A veteran of many battles, a hunter of the darkest forces, and a man whose life became a fortress of vigilance. But every fortress has a foundation. While Moody's feats are legendary, the story of the man who shaped him has never been told in the pages of canon. Still, in the cracks between words and the silences between lines, something emerges. A figure in shadow behind the paranoia, the discipline, the fury. Someone had to teach Alastor Moody how to see the world the way he did, not just with his magical eye, but with his soul. In Order of the Phoenix, when Tonks speaks of Moody with admiration and teasing respect, there's a glimpse of a man who had, in his younger years, inspired others as deeply as he terrified them. But Moody didn't arrive in the Aura office fully formed. Someone must have been there when he took his first steps as a young recruit. Given the sheer breadth of his magical knowledge, strategic brilliance, and above all, his fanatical obsession with constant vigilance, one can begin to trace the outlines of a mentor not mentioned, yet felt like a phantom limb in Moody's life. To shape a man like Moody, who saw betrayal behind every curtain and traps in every hallway, his teacher had to be more than just wise. They had to be obsessed, not merely experienced, but broken. And among the many casualties of Gellert Grindlewald's rise in the 1930s and 40s, there were wizards who saw too much, survived too much, and lived on the knife's edge of light and darkness. One such name that has since disappeared from history, purposefully perhaps, is Thaddeus Wilkes. A former soldier of magical wars, a man whose name appears only briefly in wartime aura logs listed as MIA, presumed dead. Thaddeus Wilkes, born in 1901, was an aura when the wizarding world was being torn by Grindlewald's philosophy. Like many, Wilkes was seduced at first by the rhetoric of magical supremacy, seeing in Grindlewald a promise of order after the chaos of the Great War. But Wilkes, unlike most who fell under Gellert's banner, turned back. Rumour claims he witnessed the aftermath of a cursed village in Galicia. Children turned to ash in their beds, their laughter frozen in time. Something changed in Wilkes. He returned to Britain, sought redemption, and dedicated his remaining years to teaching young recruits how to survive evil without becoming it. It is not canon, but it fits. Moody's own strategies resemble the teachings of a man who had once stood close to the edge and then turned around. In Goblet of Fire, Moody says, "Play nice, I'm not here to play nice," a line that echoes with someone who has watched his comrades die screaming. If Wilkes was his mentor, then this behavior, this refusal to trust, to smile, to relax, is learned. And if it was Wilkes who trained Moody, then Moody's every scar is not just personal, but inherited. Alastor Moody joined the Aura office in the late 1940s, a time when the ministry was quietly recovering from the damage Grindlewald had done, not just to Europe, but to the soul of wizarding governance. Wilkes, now a reclusive instructor rumoured to be living in a protected safe house in the Scottish Highlands, had taken on private apprentices. He refused ministry titles and demanded anonymity, preferring to teach those few he deemed worth breaking. Young Moody, stubborn, aggressive, and brilliant, was one such candidate. The ministry, afraid of Wilkes's past affiliations, never officially recognised the mentorship. But Moody's file bears the odd notation, private tutelage approved, Level 3 clearance required. What does that even mean? In ministry records, Level 3 clearance was used for field agents whose mentors had compromised pasts but valuable insights. It suggests someone once seen as an enemy, now used as a tool. In other words, Wilkes. Wilkes trained Moody in paranoia like a blacksmith tempers steel. His methods were brutal, ancient, even by wizarding standards. He was known to cast false attacks on his trainees in their sleep, to curse their food, to alter the appearance of friends to test loyalty. Moody's own habit of checking every corner and refusing food not prepared under his supervision began here. The stories whispered in Aura lounges said Wilkes once transfigured himself into Moody's mother and begged for mercy during a simulated duel. Moody hexed her anyway. When asked why, Moody reportedly said, "She wouldn't have begged." This is how Wilkes taught, through deception, doubt, and cruelty wrapped in love. There's something else. A line in Half-Blood Prince when Moody's name is mentioned, and Tonks says quietly, "He taught me a few things, mostly how not to get killed." She doesn't elaborate, but the implication is clear. Moody passed on the lessons he himself learned the hard way, and it's not far-fetched to imagine that these were Wilkes' teachings too, techniques never written down, spells meant not for classroom use, but for graveyards and battlegrounds. Even Moody's signature magical eye has echoes of Wilkes. An obscure paper in Magical Mechanics Quarterly from 1962 references a spell theorist named T.W., who proposed embedding detection charms into prosthetics for auras. The article was unsigned, uncredited, and later pulled from publication for dangerous magical theory. But the concept, a roving enchanted eye, surfaced years later on Moody's face. Coincidence or legacy? Dumbledore never spoke of Moody's training, but Dumbledore had a long history of protecting those who turned from darkness. He also had reason to hide Wilkes. As the man who ultimately defeated Grindlewald, Dumbledore bore responsibility for those former followers who sought redemption. Keeping Wilkes in the shadows, assigning him protégés like Moody, would have been consistent with Dumbledore's ways. Let the broken teach the next generation, but never in public view. Wilkes was never seen at official events. No photograph exists. But one ministry memo from 1951 states, "Due to the psychological instability of Mr. Wilkes, continued use as a mentor should be reconsidered. However, his results with Moody are undeniably effective." That's the only direct connection in record. Yet Moody rose quickly through the ranks faster than anyone before him. He captured 3 dark wizards in his first 2 years. Each time he used spells not taught at the academy, spells that burned through illusions, turned shadows solid, unwrapped human disguises like peeling fruit.